He had not planned to stop that afternoon, not even for a second. His mind was already crowded with the quiet calculations that ruled his life as a single father. How much time he had before school pickup, whether the groceries at home would last until the weekend, and if his daughter would notice that the soles of her shoes were wearing thin again. The city plaza was loud and impatient, people moving in fast, purposeful lines, faces glued to phones, eyes trained forward as if pausing might cost them something important. He walked through it with the same practiced invisibility, a man who had learned not to take up more space than necessary. Then he saw her. She stood near the edge of the fountain, far too still for a place built on motion. She was small, her backpack hanging crookedly from one shoulder, her hands clenched together as if holding herself in one piece. Her eyes scanned the crowd again and again, panic flickering beneath a brave, forced calm that no child should have to master. He slowed without realizing it, something deep and instinctive tightening in his chest. He had seen that look before, in the mirror after his wife died, and once, years ago, on his own daughter's face when she thought she'd lost him in a supermarket aisle. People passed the girl, some brushing close enough to make her flinch, but no one stopped. He told himself someone else would help. He told himself he was already late. But his feet betrayed him. He turned back, crouched down so he wouldn't loom over her, and spoke softly, asking if she was okay. The girl startled, then shook her head. She didn't cry. That frightened him more than tears would have. He introduced himself, kept his voice calm, slow, the way he used to when his daughter woke from nightmares. He asked her name. She whispered it, barely audible over the noise of the plaza. When he asked where her parents were, her lips trembled, and she said she couldn't find her mom. The words came out clipped, controlled, as if she was afraid that if she let go even a little, everything would spill out at once. He noticed the paper clenched in her fist, crumpled from being squeezed too hard. When he asked about it, she shook her head quickly, fear flashing across her face, as though opening it might make things worse. He resisted the urge to rush, to fix things immediately. He knew fear didn't work that way. He showed her a picture of his daughter on his phone, told her he was a dad too, that his job was helping kids feel safe. Her shoulders dropped just a fraction. He offered his hand, but didn't take hers until she reached for him first. It was cold despite the mild weather. He felt a surge of anger, not at anyone in particular, just at a world where a child could be this alone in plain sight. He guided her away from the rushing crowd to a quieter bench and asked gentle questions, giving her time to answer, never finishing her sentences for her. What was her mom wearing? Where had they last been together? The answers came in pieces, colors, half-remembered store names, the smell of perfume. He listened as if each detail mattered deeply, because it did. When her teeth started to chatter, he shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders without thinking. She protested weakly, but he insisted, joking that he was tougher than he looked. She smiled, small and uncertain, but real. He spoke to a nearby security guard, then flagged down a police officer, staying close enough that the girl could still see him, still feel anchored. Forms were filled out, descriptions repeated, radios crackled, time stretched in strange ways, minutes feeling both endless and fragile. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder from his daughter's after-school program. Guilt flared, sharp and hot, but he silenced it. He sent a quick message explaining he'd be late. He would deal with the consequences later. Right now, this child needed him. He bought her a juice from a kiosk when her stomach growled, apologizing for the cheap brand as if it mattered. She drank it carefully, eyes never leaving the crowd. To distract her, he told a story about his daughter getting lost once and deciding she'd have to live in a museum forever, married to a dinosaur. The girl let out a small laugh, then clapped a hand over her mouth as if surprised by the sound. As the hour crept on, her energy faded, her head leaning briefly against his arm. He stayed still, afraid that moving might break the fragile trust between them. Then suddenly, a voice cut through the plaza, raw, panicked, calling a name over and over. The girl stiffened. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, and before he could say anything, she slipped from the bench and ran. He followed, heart pounding, watching as a woman dropped to her knees and pulled the girl into her arms, sobbing openly, holding her as though she might disappear again. Relief crashed over him so hard his legs felt weak. He stood back, giving them space, watching as the mother looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, gratitude written in every line. She took his hands and thanked him again and again, voice breaking. He shook his head, embarrassed, saying it was nothing, that anyone would have done the same. But even as he spoke, he noticed the way people around them shifted, the way authority seemed to bend subtly toward the woman. He didn't understand it, and he didn't try to. He just smiled at the girl one last time, waved goodbye, and walked away, unaware that this single, ordinary choice had already begun to change his life forever. That night, after the noise of the city had faded into a distant hum, the moment refused to leave him. He stood at the kitchen sink, washing the same plate twice, his thoughts circling back to the girl's small hand wrapped around his finger and the look in her mother's eyes when fear finally gave way to relief. He hadn't told his daughter about it at dinner, not because it was a secret, but because he didn't want to turn kindness into a lesson or a story with a moral. He believed some things were meant to be done quietly. After bedtime, he sat on the couch with the lights off, television flickering without sound, wondering how many people had walked past that child before he stopped. He told himself it didn't matter. The world kept moving. People found their way back to each other. By morning, the memory would fade like most things did. But it didn't. The next day unfolded with the same routines he clung to for stability, packing lunches, tying shoelaces, kissing his daughter's forehead before school. He drove to work through traffic that felt heavier than usual, his mind distracted, his chest oddly tight. He worked at a mid-sized logistics company, the kind of place where effort was appreciated but rarely noticed, where promotions went to people who spoke louder in meetings. He liked the predictability of it, even if it left him perpetually tired. Late in the morning, his manager stopped by his desk and asked him to come to the conference room. The tone was neutral, unreadable, which immediately made his stomach drop. He ran through possible mistakes in his head, missed deadlines, incorrect reports, something he'd forgotten to submit. When he opened the conference room door, he saw a woman standing by the window. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, and recognition hit him like a physical force. It was her, the mother from the plaza. But she was different now, calm, controlled, dressed in a sleek suit that looked simple yet impossibly refined. There was no trace of yesterday's panic, only a composed intensity that filled the room without effort. She smiled when she saw him, and in that smile, he glimpsed the fear she'd carried before, now carefully folded away. She thanked him again, this time slowly, deliberately, as if choosing each word. He stammered something polite, unsure why he was there or what was expected of him. She introduced herself by name. It meant nothing to him at first. Then he noticed his manager's posture, too straight, too attentive. A flicker of realization passed across the man's face, followed by something like awe. The woman was a billionaire, the founder and CEO of a global tech empire whose products he used daily without a second thought. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. He suddenly became acutely aware of his wrinkled shirt, the scuffed shoes he hadn't had time to replace. She spoke about the previous day, about losing sight of her daughter for just minutes and feeling a terror no amount of wealth or power could soften. She said she had watched him from a distance before approaching, noticed how he knelt to speak to her child, how he never once looked at his phone or rushed her. She said that kind of presence was rare. He listened, uncomfortable, shifting his weight, wanting to disappear. When she asked about him, really asked, he answered honestly, because he didn't know how to perform for someone like her. He told her about his wife's illness and how quickly life had changed afterward, about learning to become both parents at once, about choosing stability over ambition because someone small depended on him. He expected pity. He didn't get it. Instead, she listened with the focused attention of someone used to solving problems, not judging them. When he finished, she said she believed character showed itself in moments where there was nothing to gain. She told him she didn't make emotional decisions, but this wasn't one of those. She offered him an opportunity at her company. Nothing extravagant, she emphasized, but real. Training, a role that matched his experience, a chance to grow into something more if he wanted it. The numbers she mentioned made his throat go dry. It was more than he had ever imagined earning. Panic flared alongside hope. He thought of his daughter, of the fragile balance he'd built. He said he needed time. She nodded, as if she'd expected that, and handed him a card. Her grip was firm, respectful. She left without fanfare, and the door clicked shut behind her. leaving him alone with his stunned manager and a future that suddenly felt terrifyingly open. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Spreadsheets swam in front of his eyes, words refusing to stick. That evening, after his daughter was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with the card in front of him, turning it over and over between his fingers. He thought about how easily he could say no, how safe that would be. He also thought about the girl in the plaza, about stopping when he hadn't planned to, about how one small decision had rippled outward. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the phone. He took a deep breath and dialed, not knowing that this choice, like the last one, would carry him somewhere he'd never expected to go. The days that followed felt unreal, like stepping into a life that belonged to someone braver and more confident than he had ever believed himself to be. The first morning at the new office, he arrived early out of habit, standing in the lobby with a paper coffee cup clutched too tightly in his hand, watching people in tailored clothes move with purpose and ease. He reminded himself that he was there for a reason, even if he didn't yet understand what that reason was. Training sessions blurred together at first, new systems, unfamiliar language, expectations that seemed impossibly high. But he threw himself into the work with the same discipline that had carried him through sleepless nights with a sick child and long shifts after grief had hollowed him out. He asked questions when he didn't understand, stayed late when others left, and studied at night after his daughter was asleep, scribbling notes at the kitchen table. He was terrified of failing, not for himself, but because this opportunity felt like a fragile gift he didn't deserve to drop. The woman checked in occasionally, never hovering, never patronizing. Sometimes it was a brief message asking how things were going. Sometimes a quiet nod in the hallway that said she was paying attention. That was enough. Slowly, the fear loosened its grip. He began to see patterns, to recognize where his experience fit, to understand that competence could exist without arrogance. At home, the changes were subtle but unmistakable. He wasn't as exhausted when he came through the door. He had the patience to help with homework without rushing, the energy to listen fully when his daughter talked about her day. She noticed before he did, smiling more, leaning into him more often, sensing that something heavy had shifted. Weeks turned into months, and with careful planning, they moved out of their cramped apartment into a small house with a narrow backyard and a tree that dropped leaves everywhere in the fall. The first night there, his daughter ran from room to room, laughing, claiming spaces as if they were treasures. He watched from the doorway, overwhelmed by a quiet gratitude that made his chest ache. He knew money hadn't created this feeling, possibility had. One evening, an invitation arrived from the woman. Dinner at her home. Not a command, not an obligation, just an invitation. He hesitated, nerves flaring again, but his daughter's excitement decided it for him. The house was warm and lived in, not the cold monument to success he had imagined. Toys were scattered in one corner, books stacked haphazardly on tables. The girl from the plaza ran to him as soon as they arrived, hugging him without hesitation, as if they were old friends reunited. Her laughter filled the room, free and unafraid, and something inside him loosened at the sound. Dinner was simple, comforting. They talked about school projects, about favorite foods, about the strange ways children interpreted the world. Later, after the girls had disappeared into a tangle of games, the woman poured tea and sat across from him at the kitchen table. She spoke about her own struggles with balancing ambition and motherhood, about the loneliness that came with power, about the constant pressure to be exceptional in every room she entered. He listened, surprised by how familiar it all sounded. They spoke about loss, too, not comparing, not measuring, just acknowledging the shapes it took in different lives. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt seen not as a problem to be solved, but as a person still becoming. As the evening wound down, she thanked him again, not for finding her daughter, but for reminding her of something she had almost forgotten. That decency could exist without an audience. That impact wasn't always loud or immediate. Driving home, his daughter asleep in the back seat, he felt a calm certainty settle over him. He didn't know where this path would lead or how long it would last. He only knew that stopping that day had mattered, that kindness had created a bridge between worlds that would never have touched otherwise. As he carried his daughter into their new home and tucked her into bed, she asked him if helping people always changed things. He thought carefully before answering. He told her that sometimes it changed the world, and sometimes it only changed you. But either way, it was always worth doing. Outside, the city lights flickered against the dark, indifferent and beautiful, and somewhere within that vastness, a single choice continued to echo, shaping lives in ways neither of them could fully see yet. Time moved differently after that, no longer measured only by survival, but by growth, by moments that hinted at a future he had once believed was closed to him. The role he'd stepped into stopped feeling temporary and began to feel earned. Projects were no longer just tasks to complete, but problems to solve, systems to improve, people to support. He discovered that leadership didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it showed up as consistency, as listening, as the willingness to take responsibility when things went wrong. Colleagues began to seek his input, then his guidance. He still left work on time whenever he could, refusing to trade one kind of absence for another, and the woman respected that more than any late night. She once told him that the best leaders built lives they didn't need to escape from. At home, the rhythm of their days softened. Mornings were no longer frantic calculations of what they could afford, but gentle negotiations over breakfast choices and playlists in the car. His daughter grew taller, more confident, her laughter easier. She invited friends over, proud of the small backyard and the tree that shed leaves like confetti. On weekends, they planted flowers they barely knew how to care for, learning together through mistakes and patience. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet, the weight of memory returned. His wife's absence a familiar ache, but it no longer hollowed him out. It sat beside hope instead of replacing it. One afternoon, the woman asked him to accompany her to a community event sponsored by her foundation. He almost declined, uncomfortable with attention, but she explained it wasn't about speeches or cameras. It was about showing up. The event was for families, for children who needed support systems they hadn't been born with. As he watched her move through the crowd, kneeling to speak to children at eye level, listening intently to parents without glancing at her phone, he recognized the same presence he'd seen in the plaza when fear had stripped everything else away. Later, when she introduced him simply as a colleague and a friend, something inside him shifted. He realized he no longer felt like an outsider borrowing someone else's life. He belonged where he stood. On the drive home, his daughter asked questions about the foundation, about why some kids needed help more than others. He answered honestly, carefully, planting seeds of empathy without burdening her with the weight of the world. Weeks later, a crisis hit one of the company's smaller divisions. Deadlines were missed, morale plummeted, and blame began to circulate. He was asked to step in temporarily to stabilize things. The old fear flared, imposter syndrome whispering that he would be exposed. But he accepted. He met with the team, not to lecture, but to listen. He acknowledged mistakes, including his own. He set clear expectations and offered support instead of threats. Progress was slow, uneven, but real. When the division recovered, the credit was shared, not hoarded. The woman thanked him privately, her respect evident not in praise, but in trust. Around the same time, the lost girl's mother, now no longer just that, invited them to a quiet weekend outing. No staff, no agenda, just a park, a picnic blanket, and two children chasing each other until they collapsed in laughter. Watching the girls play, he felt a strange fullness, a sense of connection that wasn't romantic or transactional, but deeply human. Later, as they sat side by side, she spoke about how that day in the plaza had changed her too. She admitted she'd spent years building walls, believing vulnerability was a weakness she couldn't afford. Losing her daughter, even briefly, had shattered that illusion. Finding her again, with the help of a stranger, had reminded her that strength could coexist with openness. He listened, understanding more than he said. As evening fell, they packed up, the children tired and content. Driving home, his daughter asked if the girl was her friend now. He smiled and said yes, she was. That night, as he stood by the window watching the city lights blink on, he thought about how close he'd come to walking past that moment, to choosing convenience over conscience. He understood now that life didn't change all at once, with grand gestures or perfect timing. It changed in fragments, small decisions, quiet courage, the willingness to see someone else's fear and respond with care. He tucked his daughter into bed, listening to her steady breathing, and felt a deep, steady gratitude for the man he was becoming, shaped not by wealth or status, but by the simple act of stopping when it mattered most. Years later, when his daughter was old enough to understand the shape of stories instead of just their happy endings, she asked him why their life had changed so suddenly, why there was a clear before and after that seemed to divide her childhood into two neat chapters. They were sitting on the back steps of the house, the same narrow yard stretched out in front of them, the tree now taller and fuller than it had been when they first moved in. He thought for a long moment before answering, watching the way the evening light filtered through the leaves. He told her that life rarely changed because of big plans or perfect timing. Most of the time, it shifted because of small choices made when no one was watching. He told her about the afternoon in the plaza, about almost walking past a scared little girl because he was tired and in a hurry. He admitted how close he had come to choosing his own comfort instead. His daughter listened quietly, her face serious, absorbing the weight of it. She asked if he had known, then that helping her would lead to everything else. He shook his head and smiled. He said that if he had known, it might not have been kindness anymore, but calculation. What mattered was that he stopped without expecting anything in return. As the years had passed, his work had continued to evolve. He was no longer just part of the company. He helped shape it. He mentored others the way he had once been guided, paying forward the patience and trust he'd been given. Success still felt strange to him sometimes, like a coat he hadn't quite grown into, but he wore it with humility, never forgetting where he'd started. The woman, no longer a distant figure of power in his mind, remained a constant presence in their lives. Their bond was built on shared understanding rather than obligation. They supported each other through challenges, celebrated small victories, and respected each other's boundaries. Her daughter and his grew up side by side, their friendship easy and unburdened by the circumstances that had brought them together. Sometimes, when the girls laughed together, he caught a glimpse of the frightened child from the plaza and felt a quiet wonder at how far they'd all come. On the anniversary of that day, he began a tradition without much thought. He took his daughter out for ice cream and asked her to tell him one kind thing she'd done for someone else that week. At first, her answers were small, sharing crayons, helping a classmate, but over time, they grew more thoughtful. She started noticing people the way he had learned to, the ones standing too still in busy places, the ones carrying fear quietly. Watching her, he realized that the real legacy of that afternoon wasn't the job or the house or the security they now enjoyed. It was this awareness, this instinct to care. One evening, long after the girls had gone to bed, he sat alone in the living room, the house quiet except for the distant sound of traffic. He thought about his wife, about how she had always believed that decency was a form of strength. He liked to think she would have been proud, not of the success, but of the man he had become. He understood now that grief didn't disappear, it transformed. It carved out space for empathy, for patience, for a deeper connection to the world. As he turned off the lights and headed upstairs, he felt a sense of peace that had once seemed unreachable. His life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was built on choices he could stand by, and all of it traced back to a single moment. One frightened child, one ordinary man, and the decision to stop, kneel down, and care.